thing we have to fear is
in war,
fear itself.
there is no substitute for victory.
Let us never negotiate out of fear.
We stand undivided, forever united, fighting hand in hand for the liberty we've earned, for glory and honor, for our sons and daughters, ever mindful of the lessons we've learned. Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome to the intersection of faith and politics. This is WallBuilders Live with David Barton and Rick Green. Thanks for joining us today. Visit online at wallbuilders.com, wallbuilderslive.com, and today also constitutionalive.com. Constitution Alive is our teaching on the Constitution. We take about 12 hours to give you a crash course through the entire Constitution, including the principles upon which it was founded and all kinds of action steps on how to restore our constitutional republic. Here on WallBuilders Live, we are sharing with you this week Chapter 2 out of Constitution Alive. A couple of weeks back, we shared with you Chapter 1, and today and yesterday and the day before, and again tomorrow, we're sharing with you Chapter 2. So it's a four-part series. If you're tuning in for the first time, then today you're going to be right in the middle of that four-part series, but it's still great information. You're going to enjoy it immensely, and you'll get the conclusion today of that four-part series. And you can go online to wallbuilderslive.com and listen to all four programs. We also encourage you to grab those links and share them with your friends and family so that they can get educated about the Constitution as well. We're going to pick up right where we left off yesterday. This will be the conclusion of our four-part series here on WallBuilders Live, sharing with you Chapter 2 out of Constitution Alive with David Barton and Rick Green.
I may not like a Dodge, may not like gray, doesn't matter. I don't have the authority to do anything.
That changes everything when you really think about the authority, because a nation without God, that government has the authority to do anything they want, because like you said, they're God.
You choose any other nation in the world that is secular, and you know, in Germany right now, they literally, it's a crime to homeschool your kids, because you're not the one over your, in America, we've held for generations a position Supreme Court articulated in a case called Pierce versus Society Sisters, Mine, Nebraska, that it's the fundamental right of parents to direct the education, upbringing, and care of their children.
Not the state. It's the
not
parent.
the state. But over there, no. Parents, you belong to the state. The kids in Scotland, we were talking to a guy recently who said in Scotland, from the time you're born, every kid is assigned a government official liaison to the state.
I remember that on our radio
That's
show.
Right.
Yeah, I started thinking about it. Imagine that if every kid's assigned
they
somebody from the
assume
state
that every kid belongs to the state.
Them.
That's right.
Yeah.
Every kid belongs to the state. Therefore, we have to assign you a government official. The time you're born, time you come to this earth, you don't belong to your parents. Wait a minute, we believe you do. We believe that the parents are the authority because God made the parents.
So these initial principles really matter in your day-to-day life. It's not just
huge.
books and old documents. This impacts our lives.
And it's not
today.
just, well, if you believe in God, that's fine. That's your private belief, but don't bring it in public with you. If I don't bring it in public with me, you don't have a limited government.
You're going to lose all those.
You're going to lose all the inalienable rights. So that's the second point.
Okay.
The third point is very simple. It says that to secure these rights, government shall institute among men. Now we have the purpose of government. The purpose of government is to protect inalienable rights. Those God-given rights, government exists to protect those God-given rights. Now, significantly, government does not exist to make sure we all have a job or that we've got a great economy. Government exists to make sure that we have a certain set of rights that nobody can violate, nobody can take away. Now, once we've done that, and if you do that, then you will have a prosperous government. You will have a limited government. You will have freedom. And with freedom, we take off. I mean, we're gangbusters with freedom. We invent things. We find things. We discover things. We're entrepreneurs. This 4% of the world population in America produces more than 96% of the world every year with inventions and patents and everything else. I mean, we're more creative because we have more freedom.
Because this formula
Because that formula right there.
So you're saying, so government is there to protect, not provide. It's there, it's there to protect you, and then you go out and earn and produce.
If they will keep thieves off my back, I will go and take my ideas. If they will keep somebody from stealing my ideas, I'll go and I'll create a McDonald's in every corner.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. The teachings of God's Word are the best friend civil government has because these teachings deal with the heart. Only by dealing with the heart can crime be prevented, for as Jesus explained in Matthew 5, all crime comes from the heart. Understanding this, Daniel Webster, the great defender of the Constitution, once declared, "The cultivation of the religious sentiment represses licentiousness. It inspires respect for law and order and gives strength to the whole social fabric. Whatever makes men good Christians makes them good citizens. Indeed, it is not the good Christians whom the police arrest for armed robbery, gang activity, or other such crimes. Understanding this, the Founding Fathers encouraged religious instruction, for as Daniel Webster so accurately noted, good Christians make good citizens.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
I'll create a wall march in every city if you just keep people from stealing my ideas.
And if just that principle was taught today, we wouldn't have government growing so much, because we've shifted that now. We think government's job is to provide us with every little need that we have.
And the more it provides, the less prosperous you become, because the less initiative you have and the less creative you are. Government's not creative. It is never creative. Government doesn't discover things. They don't file patents and cures and whatever.
Right.
You know, they have monopolies if they keep the private citizen from doing it, but they're not the creative source. So that's the third principle.
Okay.
Fourth principle says, and to assume among the powers of the earth a separate and equal station which the laws of nature and nature's God entitles them. We'll talk about this more later. But that told every person in that generation that there is a fixed moral law. There are certain laws you cannot cross. And they are called the laws of nature and nature's God. Now, we don't know what that means today, but we'll show you literally the books where the Founding Fathers took that phrase, what it meant, how they understood it. But there are certain absolute rights and wrongs. We live in a culture today that says, well, if it's right for you, it's right for you, but I don't think it's right. And no, you can't have a culture that says, oh, rape is okay sometimes, but not okay. And, you know, theft is okay if it's for the right reason. You can't be Machiavellian. The end justifies the means. You know, rape's okay sometimes, theft's okay sometimes, and, you know, a white lie doesn't hurt anything. No, you got to have fixed rights and wrongs. Perjury is not okay if it's for a good reason. You can't perjure yourself under oath if it's a little while. No, you have to have fixed absolutes.
But if there is no moral law, then anything
you
goes,
are.
Right?
If there's no moral law, it becomes anarchy, because I will decide what is right and wrong.
Then I get to decide what's right for me.
And if I have if my AR-15 has 30 shots in the mag rather than yours that has 20, I'm more right than you are.
Depends on how good of a shot you are.
Oh, that's true too.
But I get your point. No, that's exactly right. I mean, now there's no fix, like you said. Those
John Quincy Adams said at that point you have the law of the tiger and the shark. That's where gangs rule. That's where guys with the biggest fist rule. That's not what you have to have fixed moral laws that nobody can transgress. You don't cross these laws. The fifth thing you have from the Declaration says government instituted among men deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Now, what you get with this is what we call the consent of the governed, or the will of the majority. There is nothing in the Constitution that ever allows anything smaller than a majority to win a vote, unless you're in the U.S. Senate today, and because of the filibuster, 40 beats 60 every time. Founding Fathers opposed that. That's why they did not allow filibusters, was the rule of the majority. Now, this is point number 5, and it comes only after you've said there are inalienable rights and only after you've said there is a fixed moral law. We don't get to vote on whether rape will or won't be a crime, because that's part of the laws of nature and nature's God. We don't get to vote on whether you're going to lose your right to keep and bear arms, because that's an inalienable right. The right to defend yourself is a God-given right. God gave it to you, not the government. We can't vote that we're going to take that away from you. So the consent of the governed is good when you talk about, do we want the sidewalk to be 4 feet wide or 5 feet wide or 6 feet wide? Do we want the speed limit to be 45 or 55? Or if you're in Texas, 85? You know, that's what we can do on the consent of the governed. But we cannot vote on inalienable rights or fixed moral laws. That's the principles of the Declaration. And the sixth principle is...
Consent of the governed doesn't overrole those basic truths. And
government exists to protect those truths. And with those truths, we can have a civilized culture and move forward.
So it doesn't mean we just put our finger to the wind and whatever's popular at the time changes those fixed points.
Now, we can put our finger to the wind on sidewalk sizes and speed limits, but we can't put our finger to the wind on moral laws and on inalienable rights.
That's a great point.
That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it's the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and institute new government. It's destructive of what ends? If you get a government that does not do the first 5 things, if you get a government that says there is no creator, the creator does not give you certain guaranteed rights, government does, we don't exist to protect those rights, and by the way, there is no moral law, there's no rights and wrongs except what we tell you to do, and there's no consent of the governed, we will decide what you... If you get a government that won't uphold the first 5 things, it says it's the right of the people to alter or abolish it and institute a new government. That is the 6th principle of government. We have a lot of changes that have gone on in our constitutional government today, and they didn't happen by the people. The president, by fiat of one pen, decides he's going to change the government. The Supreme Court decides we need to make policy. We don't like that legislative body across it. You cannot have the branches going in and redefining their roles.
Violating the first 5 principles.
It's violating the first 5 principles.
Yeah.
The only way that we get the success, prosperity, freedom, liberty, everything we enjoy is those first 5 principles. And because government comes from the people, if those first 5 principles, which are our needs, are not met, then we can start this thing over, or we can pass constitutional amendments, 27 of them. We can change our government, however, but it always comes back to us. You can't have any branch change itself.
And the great thing for us, we can actually do that in a peaceable means in our nation. We've been
Absolutely.
given the tools to alter or abolish
We do not have to have revolutions to do this.
Yeah, or a revolution with ballots instead of with bullets.
See, that's the revolution we need, because at this point in American history, based on national statistics, only 1 out of 3 Americans vote in presidential elections. Only 1 out of 4 vote in non-presidential elections, which means, since it takes a majority, with only 1 out of 3 voting in presidential elections, that means that half of that 1 out of 3 chooses the president, which is about 18%,
Wow.
17, which means 5 out of 6 Americans are not choosing the president right now, and 7 out of 8 Americans are not choosing their governors.
But they're living with the consequences.
They're living with the consequences.
Yeah, it's impacting
You
their
want to
lives.
have a revolution? Show up at the ballot box and say, I've had it. I'm not going to be part of that 5 out of 6 that don't vote for my president anymore. I'm going to vote for my president. Here's what I'm going to get. And when we decide to do that, we can have an easy revolution. So the 6 principles that are very simple here is: 1, there's a divine creator; 2, inalienable rights come from God; 3, government exists to protect those rights; 4, there's a fixed moral law; 5, you have the consent of the governed below the moral law and inalienable rights; and 6 is, if we don't get these 5 things, we can change it till we do.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. Christians have always believed that the greatest life-changing experience available to any individual is a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, and the testimonies of numerous converts confirm the dramatic changes which often accompany salvation. One such testimony of change comes from founding father Noah Webster, who explained, "I was led by a spontaneous impulse to repentance, prayer, and entire submission and surrender of myself to my Maker and Redeemer. I now began to understand and relish many parts of the Scriptures which before appeared mysterious and unintelligible. In short, my view of the Scriptures, of religion, of the whole Christian scheme of salvation, and of God's moral government are very much changed. The power of God to change a life yielded to Him was just as evident at the time of the Founding Fathers as it still is today."
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
We mentioned where some of this comes from. Back in
Right.
Philadelphia, we talked about that Richard Henry Lee mentioned that John Locke's 2 Treatises of Government had a huge impact on Jefferson. Okay, this is the coolest thing you've ever given me. Actually, I have to admit, you loaned it to me, but possession's 9/10 of the law.
You're
I've had
right.
it for about 10 years now, so I'm
You're an
claiming
attorney.
it, but someday it'll go back.
Let's hear you go argue that in court, attorney. Come on.
All right, this is John Locke's 2 Treatises of Government. This is, I believe, a 1784 version or 74 version, if I remember right. So this is Locke.
That's a 1774.
Oh, you got me beat right there. The
1774.
dueling Locke books. So tell us more about Locke, though, because I hear a lot of people say a lot of negative things about him, and if he was such an influence on the founders, then that means they weren't religious guys, they didn't believe in God. What can we
One
learn
of the
about
things
Locke?
you know for sure about Locke, and political scientists have documented that he was one of the 3 most frequently cited individuals in the founding era. Founding era goes from 1760 through 1805. In that era where we're establishing and operating our first constitutional government, he's one of the top 3 guys. Now,
So if we want to really understand the document itself, we need to know a little bit about a lot about the guys that gave it.
He is the guy in the 1760s and 1770s. He is the guy quoted most often because that's the age where we did the Declaration. Richard Henry Lee, you mentioned, he said that they, quote, copied the Declaration from those 2 treatises of government.
Yeah.
Now, that's why in American public schools prior to 50 years ago, in government class, you would have read those 2 treatises.
Really?
Because that's where how can you study government and not know where it came from? Well, you read this. You will not read this today. And as you know, your version there is an inch thick, mine's 3/4 an inch thick. They're both less than 400 pages long.
Yeah.
This book cites the Bible over 1,500 times to show the proper operation of civil government. Now
Now let me do the math here. That's got to be, what, 3-4 times a page?
3 or 4 times a page.
So you can't go a page without reading the Bible, and yet we're told these guys didn't respect the Bible.
We're told they didn't, and we're told John Locke is a great deist, that he was one of the leading deists. You know, weird thing about Locke as a deist, I wonder why he did this little book right here. This is called the Commonplace Book to the Bible. You open this up, and it's the Scripture's sufficiency practically demonstrated. Now, wait a minute, what's a deist doing, showing us that the Bible applies to every aspect of life?
Yeah, I mean, think it practically demonstrated. So he's saying this is how you use the Bible.
This is how you use the
in
Bible
your life.
and
A
everything
deist today
alive.
would not do that.
No way. And so he talks to the reader and how applicable this is, and then he goes into here. And what he has done is he's taken all these verses out of the Bible and put them in categories. So the duty of a believer with respect to humility, the duties arising from religion relating husband and wife, religious duties toward God, and affliction and persecution. I mean, you take any category and you put the Bible verses together. Why would a deist do that?
Yeah, if you thought it was some watchmaker God that steps back and has nothing to do with us, you wouldn't be applying God's Word to your marriage,
to everything. And see, that's the thing, is because he is the guy who had such a great impact. Because he had such a big impact, and because he is so religious. Oh no, he's a deist. You don't need to read his works in government class anymore. So, to show you how far we've come in our thinking, even as people of faith, I was recently with a group of about 500 pastors, and I said, how many Bible verses can you guys think of that deal with government? Less than 10 in the room. I said, here's a little book right here with more than 1,500.
Wow.
And he does say it is the Scriptures practically demonstrated, the sufficiency of the Scriptures. The Bible applies to everything. And the founders knew that. As a matter of fact, that's why if you look at the Declaration of Independence, those rights set forth in the Declaration, historians have documented that every single right set forth in the Declaration of Independence had been preached from the American pulpit prior to 1763. The Declaration of Independence is nothing more than a listen to the sermons we've been hearing in church.
So the church was not applying government principles to our life. The church was applying the Bible, and that got reflected in our government principles. So if it was getting taught from the pulpit, it showed up in our government documents.
This guy right here, a guy named John Wise. John Wise, historians like Clinton Roster, and actually Cornell University, he was such a great historian, award-winning historian, that they have an endowed chair of history, the Clinton Roster Chair of History, a great historian. And he went back and said, you know, the American thinking was so different. No other nation did what we did. France didn't do it, Spain didn't do it, Portugal, Italy. No other nation.
So he had to be wondering why.
Why
would we do something different?
And his question, what were the 6 greatest intellectual forces in shaping the thinking of the founders? He went through and identified 6 greatest, and 4 of the 6 were preachers, and he was one of them. This guy right here, now these are his sermons from 1710 and 1717, and you'll find that by 1680, now he's a preacher in Massachusetts, you'll find by 1680, he had looked through the Bible, and he preaches a sermon, well, looking at government in the Bible, it's very clear that God's preferred form of government is the consent of the governed. I think I've heard that phrase before. He looks through here and he says...
This was when? This is
1680s.
So this is 100 years before.
1680s.
And he's already talking about consent of the governed. Okay.
And 100 years before, he says, you know, there is a creator, and he's created all men equal. And he's given them all the same set of rights.
Wow.
1680s. And he goes and he says, when you look at what the Bible says about taxation, it is very clear that taxation without representation is tyranny.
No kidding.
Right here.
So this is, I mean, when we say seeds of liberty, he was literally planting 100 years before what would bear fruit.
That's it. Well,
in our founding document.
Let me show you how significant this was, because he did this in 1680s. Tell me what the date of publication of that is right down there.
Oh, I have to read Roman numerals. This is going to be difficult. Okay, so this is 17...
72.
Is it 72? I was going to say 52, so that's 72. Okay, so
17.
So the founders then, in their era...
You know who the Sons of Liberty are?
Yeah.
All right. Who are the great Sons of Liberty?
So that was Sam Adams started
Sam
it, right?
Adams and John Hancock and James Otis and all those guys' sons. They're the ones who
reprinted his sermons
and distributed across America, so Americans would know how to think going into this conflict.
Okay, so wait, so these are sermons preached 100 years before the Declaration. The founders themselves reprinted his sermons,
Sons of Liberty,
to help educate their generation,
to get them thinking on right principles.
So, okay, this gives me great hope, because that means if they did it, if they could do this 200 and whatever years ago, reprint, re-educate, bring these things back to light, then we can do the same thing today.
Absolutely.
We bring these documents out. We educate a generation. They come back to these principles. We bring them.
And remember that principle number 1, and it's demonstrated through here, but principle number 1 of the Declaration, there is a Creator. And if you don't recognize the Creator, then you got trouble. Now, this is the other thing we get today. Founding fathers, atheist, agnostic, deist. Really? You know, let me take something right here. This is, you tell me, what's the name at the bottom of this thing?
George Washington.
George Washington. This is his first ever call to prayer in America as the federal government. That is Washington's.
1789.
This is going to be October the 17th, 1789. He calls the entire nation to honor God. Now, why would Washington do that? He gives the answer right here in this first paragraph. Let me just put it up.
Okay.
I'll show you what's in this first paragraph. Washington is now calling the nation to honor God. Why would he do it? He says it's the duty. And notice the word duty. That's a word that is a big, important word. We don't talk about it much today. Military still gets it. A lot of the rural people know what duty means. I built houses for a long time. I had hundreds of thousands of dollars change hands. I never signed a contract in my life. I'd walk into the bank guy, we would talk about the terms, we would shake hands on it. Neither one of us would break that contract. That you have a duty to keep your word.
Yeah.
I don't need it on paper. I've got a duty. And
Today you hear duty and people think, oh, responsibility. I don't want that. Yeah.
See, duty in his day is a legally binding contractual obligation. In 1913, the definition of duty was reduced to a responsibility, and today's dictionary says it's that which one ought to do. Well, that's not the same as
a choice. Sounds like a choice.
A choice.
Instead of this is what you do.
So what he's saying, it's a legally binding contractual obligation of who? Of nations. Legally binding contractual obligations of nations to do 4 things concerning God. Number 1, to acknowledge the providence of Almighty God. Number 2, to obey His will. Number 3, to be grateful for His benefits. And number 4, humbly to implore His protection and favor. And that's what nations are supposed to do, not individuals. So they believe this philosophy that you have to honor and recognize God as a culture.
But this is just the father of the country.
I mean, he's one of the great deist founding fathers, which is what we're told in school today.
But he's obligating the nation.
He's obligating
the nation has a duty to do
the nation, not individuals. The nation has.
So all this stuff about official acts and you can keep your religion at home and you can talk about God, but don't even have a public day of prayer. Remember when our governor Rick Perry couldn't even pray with people in Houston?
Yeah, he got together
because he's governor. He's not allowed to pray with people because it's official. Exactly what we want is official prayer. Have you ever wanted to learn more about the United States Constitution but just felt like, man, the classes are boring, or it's just that old language from 200 years ago, or I don't know where to start? People want to know, but it gets frustrating because you don't know where to look for truth about the Constitution either. Well, we've got a special program for you available now called Constitution Alive with David Barton and Rick Green, and it's actually a teaching done on the Constitution at Independence Hall in the very room where the Constitution was framed. We take you both to Philadelphia, the cradle of liberty and Independence Hall, and to the WallBuilders Library, where David Barton brings the history to life to teach the original intent of our founding fathers. We call it the Quick Start Guide to the Constitution because in just a few hours through these videos, you will learn the Citizen's Guide to America's Constitution. You'll learn what you need to do to help save our constitutional republic. It's fun, it's entertaining, and it's going to inspire you to do your part to preserve freedom for future generations. It's called Constitution Alive with David Barton and Rick Green. You can find out more information on our website now at wallbuilders.com.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
See that? What's that?
Proclamation for Thanksgiving.
It's handwritten. It's done by a guy named John Langdon. Oh, he's the governor. Oh, wait a minute. He's the signer of the Constitution.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what do you mean a governor can't have prayer? Here's a governor who's a signer of the Constitution. So the signer of the Constitution thought it was the right thing. You've also got Samuel Huntington. There's a signer of the Declaration. He's a call to prayer. He's now governor of his state. He calls the people to prayer.
So this is an official act from a governor.
Here's one from Oliver Wolcott, another signer of the Declaration, another governor of his state calling people to prayer. Here's one from John Langdon, governor of the state. Now this is, that was handwritten. This is called a broadside because they would nail these up to trees or they nailed it up the side of bars. Evidently somebody nailed it up and you see the part missing.
And tore it down, look.
and here you've got John Hancock. I mean, here's his. I mean, even behind us. We got all these things behind us. If I go to this one right here, pull this one out, you'll recognize the guy there. Who's at the bottom?
So we're back to the Sons of Liberty. So here's Sam Adams when he's governor.
When he's governor.
Okay, now this kind of ties it together for me. So Adams reprints, he and others reprint John Wise. So there's the principles from a pastor 100 years earlier. Now he's in an official capacity and he's basically reiterating those exact same principles from John Wise.
And that's the first principle of American government, is you have to have something higher than government, and it was God.
Yeah.
And because God's higher than government, he gives us a certain set of rights to government. You cannot touch those rights. Now we have limited government. And by the way, government, you exist primarily to protect the rights that God told all of us. So we have a right to free speech. We have a right to self-defense. We have a right to sanctity of our home. We have a right to justice. We have a right to trial by jury. Government, you have to protect those rights. It's all the things that they listed out as rights.
But if you take the first principle out, all of that falls apart. You take God out. So these are the seeds of liberty.
These are the seeds of liberty.
This is what produced this most incredible nation in the history of the world. So if we go back to the seeds, we can bear that same fruit that we've had.
Once you understand this, now we can talk about the Constitution, because now you'll understand the Constitution.
All right, well, we're going to step back and get a 30,000 feet view of the Constitution in our next section, kind of a broad overview of the entire Constitution when we return here on Constitution Alive with David Barton and Rick Green. Well, friends, that was Constitution Alive with David Barton and Rick Green. It was Section 2 out of the full 12-hour program. And today, of course, was the final segment of our 4 programs this week, where we had to break up that Chapter 2 for you in order to get it all in. We hope you enjoyed it. We hope you'll check it out at constitutionalive.com for the entire program on DVD and the workbook. And we also encourage you to share it in your Sunday school class, bring friends into your home and open it up so you can teach them on the Constitution as well. More information there at constitutionalive.com. If you'd like to share just this particular chapter that we've had this week here on WallBuilders Live, all 4 programs from this week are available right now at wallbuilderslive.com. Thank you for listening to WallBuilders Live with David Barton and Rick Green.
We stand undivided.